You know what? I like Colin Kaepernick. I respect him. I do. I admire him for what he did. He put his money where his mouth is. And he said what he said, something he believed in, knowing he was going to get a ton of crap about it and probably lose a lot of money in the process. Well, that's where I stand. We'll get to, we'll talk more about it in just a bit here. Here's the number, 663-1270, 663-1270. Hey there, hi there, ho there. You're as welcome as can be. Jim Walsh on SuperTalk 1270 and SuperTalk1270.com. Again, this is one of those days where I have what I guess you'd call it a good problem. We got so much good stuff to talk about. It's really hard to know where to start. But I did want to get the Kaepernick thing out there because you couldn't go anywhere over the weekend without seeing somebody on the boob tube or on the net getting up on their big white horse and going on and on about this guy who's wealthy and privileged. And a couple of points I want to make about this. First of all, as I said before, the guy put his money where his mouth is. You know, he's going to get a lot of backlash about this. Now, we're talking about the guy who refused to stand during the national anthem. Now, would I make my point the way he did? Probably not. I'd find some other way to do it. But he did what he did, and so far at least, he's standing by it. The one way he would lose my respect would be if he backtracked. If he all of a sudden decide he was going to retract the remarks because he was afraid of losing money. That doesn't seem to be the case. Not so far anyway. And you know, I've seen the videos of this guy answering the basic questions. It doesn't seem to me like he's posturing. If I thought he was posturing and just doing this for the publicity, I'd be all over his case. I don't really get that impression. I don't. I get the impression that he is sincere about this. And let's face it, this is something that a lot of folks don't really want to talk about. This is the elephant on the couch. A lot of people don't want to acknowledge the fact that he's got a real point here. This isn't somebody making up some kind of non-issue to talk about. This isn't some yo-yo talking about border walls. He's talking about a very real issue, a very real problem that's going on in this country. And you'd have to be pretty clueless or an out-and-out bigot or a combination of the two to not see that he's right. People of color are not treated the same in this country, not by the law. Black men are not treated the same by the law as other people. And again, the number 663-1270. And do me a favor, don't play the veterans card. What I call the veterans card is when people say, well, you know, our men died, our troops died fighting to protect his rights. That to me is an inane statement. Because if you can't use the rights that were fought for, what's the point of having them? I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam years. I was a kid, but I remember a lot of it. I remember a lot of these hard hats, the hardcore Nixon supporters. They said things like, hey, you know, we fought in World War II to give these young hippies the freedom of expression. So why don't they shut up? I remember the first time I heard Archie Bunker on TV, All in the Family said something very similar to that. And everybody laughed, and you thought, well, okay, it's satire. You know, it kind of makes a point. But there are people who actually believe that. They're actually saying that. I don't know. Yeah, let's face it. If Colin were just another schmo, just running around, nobody would care, okay? But the fact is, he's a rich athlete. He's making a lot of money. So people take it as some kind of affront to the American system. Well, he is criticizing an aspect of the American system. That is true. But we can't ignore the fact that there's a lot of people who are worked up over this guy because he's an uppity nigger who doesn't know when to sit down and be thankful to the good and decent, God-fearing white Christian Americans who made him what he is. Now, I'd be a damn fool to say that everybody criticizing him is a bigot. I would also, however, be just as much of a damn fool to deny that that aspect of it is out there. It is out there. So where do you stand on the issue? I'd love to hear from you on this. Yeah, we can be cool. We can be civil. I don't have a problem with you calling in and being disagreeing, as long as you're not disagreeable. We try to make it very zen around here, you know. But seriously, I invite your input. 663-1270, that's the number. My name is Jim Walsh. It's SuperTalk 1270. A couple other things I hope to get to a little bit later on today. Oh, I do have a transcription here of Mr. Kaepernick's recent interview with the big newspaper/website it's in San Jose, California. Did you hear the story about the woman in Devil's Lake who is going to prison for a year for spitting on a policeman? True story. 21-year-old woman. There was an incident in July where she was accused of being drunk and combative at somebody's house in Devil's Lake. And authorities said she unsuccessfully tried to run from officers, resisted arrest, and spit in the face of a police officer. Now, here's the thing about it. Well, it's a couple of things. First of all, and I swear I'm not making any of this up. My source is the Associated Press. And this woman pleaded guilty a couple of days ago to, and I quote here, felony contact by bodily fluids. Apparently that's a thing, okay? Apparently they had to get that specific about it. I find that fascinating. They actually have this on the books. Felony contact by bodily fluids. I would think felony contact would pretty much cover it, wouldn't you? Just say it. And the court document shows she was sentenced to 2 years in prison, 1 year suspended, 2 years of probation, and $600 in fees. Now, is it just me, or is that a bit much for, spitting on a cop? Not that I advocate spitting on cops. It just seems a little heavy for me. 663-1270. Love to hear from you. Jim Walsh on SuperTalk 1270 and SuperTalk1270.com. More conversation, your calls, coming up.
Currently at 62.
The Red River Farm Network. Ag News is here on SuperTalk 1270.
We'll talk about Gene Wilder a little bit later on this hour. Some comments, couple of my favorites of his roles, movies he did that a lot of folks don't remember. Everybody talking about Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles, Willy Wonka. But there's a couple others I want to mention that were very memorable roles that he had that I just thought that a lot of people are overlooking. We'll get to that in a bit. All right. Lady in Devil's Lake spits on a cop. She gets a year in the pen. Well, she got 2 years. A year was suspended. So she's gone to jail for a year. Kid at Stanford commits rape, and he gets out. He's getting out. They're letting him out. What's wrong with this picture? I mean, not that I'm in favor of spitting on cops. I say I don't advocate it, as a rule. But is a year in the slammer, don't you think that's a bit much for spitting on a cop? Nah, I'm not saying you walk away with nothing, no. I love the fact that apparently on the books, I don't know if it's a state law or a city law, but in Devil's Lake, North Dakota, if you spit on the cob, you can expect to go to jail for about a year, maybe 2 years. And there are some other misdemeanor charges that the woman here pleaded out to. The Devil's Lake Journal reports the woman said in court she was I give the number 663-1270, 663-1270. Jim Walsh on SuperTalk 1270. The Devil's Lake Journal reports she said in court that she was too drunk to remember the incident. Duh. And acknowledged that there was sufficient evidence to convict her. I'm sure they got out their little swab and collected the sample of whatever it was that was on the gun, and they did a little DNA analysis there. They didn't have the swab or cheek or anything; it was right there, 2 years in prison, 1 year suspended, 2 years of probation, and $600 in fees. Oh, really? For a woman spitting on a police officer. I don't know. You tell me if you think that's an appropriate sentence. Like I say, when you got this kid out in Stanford, out in California, who raped a woman, and he's getting out, something ain't quite cricket here. 663-1270, 663-1270. Jim Walsh on SuperTalk 1270. The name of the show is Bis-Man Weekly. Actually, it's more like Bis-Man a couple of times a monthly. But we're working on that. I'm hoping that at some point, at some juncture in the near future, we can get on more of a regular basis. And that would be a very cool thing. We're working on it. We're working on it. And talking about the Colin Kaepernick thing, and again, I will say what I said a couple of minutes ago. Colin Kaepernick knew he was going to get a ton of crap for doing what he did, and he went and did it anyway because apparently he believes in what he's saying. And it is a real issue. And for that, he earns my respect and my admiration, simply because he put his money where his mouth is. Hello, you're on SuperTalk 1270. Thank you. Whoops. It's the sound of buzz. Okay, we know the phones are working. Number 663-1270, 663-1270. Would enjoy very much your input here on the show this afternoon. Now, okay, the thing with I was saying we knew he was going to get a ton of crap for this, and there's a good chance he may lose a fair amount of money in this deal. His endorsement deals and all that. If they want out, they have an out. They can back out of it, and legally it's their right to do so. I'm hoping they won't, but if they want to, it's their prerogative. And it isn't like he was protesting something that doesn't affect him either. Maybe you feel differently. Good morning. You're on SuperTalk 1270. Thank you for calling. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
Well, on that lady in Devil's Lake.
Yeah, we're talking about the lady. I'm sorry. Yeah, lady in Devil's Lake. She spit on a police officer, and she was convicted. And there was actually a law there that if you assault somebody with your bodily fluids, and that's not a joke, that's an actual law.
I know.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just recapping.
It goes back to the 80s when AIDS and HIV were first discovered. And people were spitting on cops, and they were worried. I think it's a state law that was adopted pretty much by every state.
Yeah.
But it was a fear of those two things that caused a lot of laws to be passed.
I got you. That's a good point, although I don't know that spitting on somebody necessarily is going to give them AIDS. I think it would take a little bit more than that.
No, but the fear, when AIDS and HIV first came around, no one knew right away how they were transmitted.
You're right.
And back when it first started, there were no research had been done on it.
Yeah, the testing methodologies were very primitive at the time by today's standards. Yeah.
And there were no drugs to combat it either. And so basically, if you spit on somebody and they would get AIDS or HIV, you were pretty much set like a death sentence.
Well, yeah. Well, as I understand it, if you have a disease like that and you do spit on somebody or whatever, and they do manage to get the disease, if you know you have it, can you not be held accountable for like murder 2 or manslaughter?
Well, I don't know. Murder law is very from state to state.
Yeah.
If you don't, like some states I know have a law, if you don't die within a year of the incident, you can't be charged with murder.
Right.
So like if you shoot somebody and they live for a year and a day and then die, even though the cause of the death was the bullet that you fired, they don't necessarily, they can't charge in certain states, they can't charge you with murder. So assault with a deadly weapon.
Yeah.
And now the thing is, if they tested this lady and she didn't have HIV or AIDS or any other disease,
and we don't know if she does or not. That wasn't even mentioned in the story.
Well, you were saying, maybe they should have done a test to see if she had anything, and maybe the law should be rewritten that, okay, if you do have AIDS or HIV, then, and like you said, I don't know if saliva is
I don't think it is,
can transmit the virus, but if it can, then maybe assault is appropriate. But if they just spit on you as a police officer, sure, it's insulting and everything, but if they have no disease,
I would think a year in the slammer would be a bit much for that.
Would be a bit much.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, sir. We have a break coming up, but I want to thank you very much for calling here. Super Talk 1270, the number is 663-1270. A woman convicted of spitting on a police officer. Now, setting aside the whole question of things like AIDS or hepatitis, because there was no mention of that in the story. So I'm going to take an educated guess here and assume that it was just not a factor here. And assuming it's not a factor, assuming that she was just apparently she was drunk off her hoo-hoo, we do know that much about the woman. But she spit on the cop. For spitting on a policeman is a year in prison. Well, it was 2 years suspended, but she's going to spend an actual year inside the can. Is a year in the can too much for spitting on a cop? That is the question. To me, that would be a bit extreme. But that's just me. Number 663-1270, 663-1270. If you're just tuning in, name of the show is Bis-Man Weekly. This is Super Talk 1270. You can also hear about it on Super Talk 1270 AM. Good morning, Super Talk 1270. Thanks for calling.
Good morning. I've heard your discussion about the lady from Devil's Lake.
Yes, ma'am. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's a wonderful thing for her because she'll probably get her teeth fixed. She'll probably have new glasses. She'll probably be very, very well taken care of and nourished. Isn't that great?
You get a plate of beans and a dental plan every day.
I think this is just hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got to nail a woman somehow, and I hope that she gets all the dental work done and gets new eyeglasses, et cetera, et cetera. She'll be in good health. Probably have all her vaccinations and everything.
I detect.
Have a good day.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I would venture to guess that lady is kind of sympathetic toward the woman. Again, the woman spit on the cop, and nobody here is advocating that we go around spitting on police officers. But is a year in prison, do you think that's a bit much? Just asking. Number here, 663-1270. Love to hear from you. It's Bis-Man Weekly on Super Talk 1270. For more conversation, your calls coming up.
My belly's getting bigger, but my bladder got so small. Yeah. I'm an older, but wiser kind of guy.
Yeah, tell me about it. My age, the big decision is what kind of fiber supplement to use. Which works best? I mean, you compare them, well, this one does this and this one. Let's not go there. Thank you, Steve Bryan, for that very clever musical rendering. It's SuperTalk 1270 and SuperTalk1270.com. Jim Walsh and Bis-Man Weekly. So what is the right age to give a kid a cell phone? I ask this, of course, because school is back in session. And boy, there's a lot we could do with that. We've talked about all the aspects of going back to school, about when it's right to start the school year. See, I'm a big advocate of starting school after Labor Day. Always have been. That's how I did it when I was growing up in the state I grew up in. And I just think it works better for all concerned that way, but that's just me. The other thing, I want to get back to this here. Number, by the way, is 663-1270. The right age to give a child a cell phone, a fellow I know named Jerry Del Cagliano, who's a college professor, and he also writes a blog about the media and what's going on in TV, radio, and the internet. He came up with this, and I just came across this today. Apparently it's brand new, this column of Jerry's. So thank you, Jerry. He says, some parents are handing out cell phones to children as young as 4 years old. Now, kids are wired differently than most adults. They can adapt to digital devices almost as quickly as they get them in their hands. But should they be getting a cell phone when they're a child? And the average age, says Jerry, seems to be 10 when the majority of kids convince their parents they finally need a phone. Mom, I need a phone. Mom. And, of course, the parents overcame any guilt they might have by saying, well, I know where the kid is at least, and I can reach them. Now, the baby boomers, my generation, they laugh at all this because, we grew up without cell phones. We had a Dixie cup and a really long piece of thread if we wanted to talk to our parents. And we turned out just fine. Well, YouTube is, of course, the obsession of a lot of young people. They use it the way their parents search Google, or in my case, Yahoo. Yes, I'm one of the last Yahoo holdouts on the planet. But the issue most important considering when buying a cell phone for your child is changing. Many children are turning inward and becoming so distracted by their phones that they're becoming less able to socialize. And even putting rules in place that keep your kids disconnected from actual phone service, in that light, or texting, in that light, that can be damaging. I mean, they just go sit there and stare at their palm. And they just stare at their palm, play the games, or visit the sites that their parents do allow them to use. So going forward, he concludes, it's not whether children need a cell phone, it's whether they need to avoid the distractions that are making our modern culture detached, unfeeling, and antisocial until they develop socially. And that's, of course, he kind of dances around the issue. I like Jerry, but he kind of does that. So let's put the nail on the head here. What is the right age to give a kid a cell phone? I'm thinking 10 to me is a little early. I would think more like 12. Like 11 or 12. Right about the time they're starting junior high school. They're probably just beginning to get responsible enough to know how to use it. I know kids are not very responsible. I know college students who are not responsible enough to have a cell phone. But in general, to me, in my mind, 11 or 12. Now, maybe your experience. I like to hear about it. If you're a parent, every time I talk about this, and the number is 663-1270. When I talk about these issues, and I have an opinion. People always say, well, Jim, you're not a parent. You don't understand. Which is the most condescending thing in the world. Like I can't have an opinion because I didn't, I didn't get somebody, pregnant 30 years ago. Therefore, I'm not capable of having an opinion. Yeah, it's kind of stupid. Nonetheless, if you are a parent, or if you're like me, a former child, that's the position I'm coming from. I'm speaking on the authority of being a former child, a former member of the group that's most closely affected by this, kids. I used to be a kid, so I know something about the kid's perspective. So, you tell me, number here, 663-1270, 663-1270, the right age to give a child a cell phone, 663-1270. Something else I wanted to say about the Colin Kaepernick controversy, the big flap, and the fact if you're just checking in, I was saying that I respect the guy. I respect what he did, sitting down for the national anthem, but I respect it because as an act of protest, he knows that he's going to get a ton of criticism. He already has. There's going to be a backlash, and he may lose a lot of money doing this. And I could be wrong, but from what I've seen of the guy, I've seen the videos of the guy, press conferences, interviews. It doesn't seem to me like it's just a case of some yo-yo with an ego who's out there posturing. I get the impression that he's sincere about this. So as long as I get that impression, and as long as he doesn't start to backpedal because he's afraid of losing a little money, that would cause me to lose respect for the guy. That would cause me to think he's being kind of a jerk. Otherwise, as long as he stands behind what he says, it's the Muhammad Ali thing. People didn't like what he said, but at the end of the day, they had to respect him because he was willing to make the sacrifice for what he believed in. And that's where I stand with Colin Kaepernick, 663-1270, 663-1270. There was a movie out about a year ago called Trumbo, story of Dalton Trumbo, who is one of the greatest, he's certainly one of the greatest screenwriters this country ever produced. He was also a novelist. He wrote Johnny Got His Gun, a legendary anti-war novel. They made it into a movie. Metallica did that video, which a really creepy, freaky video, which was based on the novel. The guy was a major talent. A little twisted, though. But the thing was, Dalton Trumbo was a communist. Now, going back, he became a communist at a time in this country's history when it wasn't that big a deal. If you know your history, during World War II, the commies were our allies. Stalin was our bud. Old FDR, Mr. Roosevelt, him and Mr. Churchill and old Joe Stalin, they had that little powwow together over in Europe, in Yalta, or was it Malta? Well, one of the two. And then Potsdam, and then things kind of fell apart from there after the end of the war. But the point is, there was a time in this country when being a communist was not necessarily that big a deal. And Dalton Trumbo, he was a communist. I'll say that right up front. But what I've always said is I can respect the guy. Now, I'm not a communist, but I can respect the guy because he stuck to his guns. He refused to name names before Congress. He took his jail time. He went to jail. He didn't bitch about it. He took his jail time, and then he got out. He picked up where he left off. He lived with the blackballing that happened with the whole thing, the Red Scare and all that business. The point is, he put his money where his mouth was. Anybody who does that, regardless of what they believe in, what they say, I can respect somebody like that. I can respect them. I don't have to like their political views, but I can respect them as a human being. That's what we're getting at here. And that's kind of where I stand with this Colin Kaepernick thing. He is putting his money behind what he's saying. And I get the impression he's sincere about it. Just me. 663-1270. Love to hear from you. Here at Super Talk 1270. And we're talking about the lady in, I don't know if I call her a lady. the woman in Devil's Lake who spit on the cop and was convicted. I kid you not, there's an actual law in the books. Felony contact by bodily fluid, which sounds funny, but as a previous caller was mentioning, it probably goes back to the big AIDS scare of the 80s and the 90s when people were concerned that, sharing bodily fluids like that, you could get AIDS. Of course, now we know better, but there was a time when we had no idea. Okay, fair enough. But still, taking the AIDS thing off the table and assuming that that's not an issue here, spitting on a cop, a year in prison for spitting on a cop. Don't you think that's a bit much? 663-1270. Coming up, we'll talk about Gene Wilder, a couple of his more memorable performances you may have missed. Super Talk 1270 and Jim Walsh, more conversation, your calls coming up.
Right now, 69 degrees.
Here's Sean Hannity, weekday afternoons on Super Talk 1270.
Jim Walsh on Super Talk 1270. Oh, wait a minute. Let's go to the Wilder. Give me the Gene Wilder thing.
Hold your breath.
Here we go.
Make a wish. Count to 3.
Willy Wonka.
Come with me, and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. Take a look, and you'll see into your imagination.
You are wrong. Good day, sir.
We'll begin with a spin, traveling in the world of my creation.
Remembering Gene Wilder, one of my all-time favorites, passed away. Complications from Alzheimer's. I had no idea that he had Alzheimer's. God, that's a god-awful thing to deal with for family members. I'm kind of dealing with it right now with a family member. Not a pretty thing. But Gene Wilder, remembering some of his more memorable roles. 663-1270. My name is Jim Walsh. A couple of the great roles, a couple of my favorite Gene Wilder roles that nobody is mentioning. And everybody's talking about the Mel Brooks movies, Young Frankenstein, of course. That was, you were talking about the nonsensical ravings of a... And they're playing the clips of him with, what's his name, the little guy, Marty Feldman? Igor? I know, Igor, yes. What was her name? Abby Normal. I have to go home and watch that today, maybe. But, and what are the others? Blazing Saddles, of course, where he was the Waco Kid. And people mentioning Silver Streak. He did several movies with Richard Pryor, right? Stir Crazy. And there was that one where he was the deaf guy and Richard Pryor was the blind guy. Remember that? I don't even remember the name of that one. And there was a couple others like that. But what I wanted to mention, two of my favorite Gene Wilder movies that nobody's mentioning. Number one, the original version of The Producers, where he was Leo Bloom of Bialystok and Bloom, if you remember the movie. He was the sidekick to Zero Mostel, and God, what a team, what a lineup. I mean, as good as the musical was, as good as the remake with Nathan Lane was, the original is just, Zero was a force of nature, and Gene Wilder was perfect as his, I don't want to say foil, his sidekick. All right. And by the way, I did want to mention something about Wonka. People compare his Wonka with Johnny Depp. Now, I like Johnny Depp as an actor in a lot of things. I think he's an okay actor, but I will say this. of the two performances there, I vastly prefer Gene Wilder's for this one simple reason. I've had just enough training as an actor to get myself in real trouble and say things that are really stupid, but here goes. Johnny Depp as Wonka. To me, he was trying a bit too hard to show off the dark side of the character. Because obviously Wonka had that dark side, if you remember what happened to some of those bratty kids. Wonka had the dark side, and that was a whole part of the story there. But Johnny Depp, he pushed it, in my opinion. He didn't trust the character. He didn't trust the writers. Because everything you needed to know about the character was there in the writing. Sometimes an actor needs to know when to get out of the character's way. And that's what Gene did in the case of Wonka, beautifully. He didn't push it. He didn't insult our intelligence. He wasn't going out of his way to say, hey, check the dark angle on this dude. I definitely got that with the Depp portrayal. Not so with Gene. Gene knew to get out of the way of the character and the writing. If the writing is good, a lot of times the writing, you just, let the character come through and the character will tell you all you need to know about it. You with me on that? Poor Dan Rogers, he's probably sitting at home listening to this right now and his head's exploding. What are you talking about? You have no idea what you're talking about. Anyway, hi, Dan. But I wanted to get back to the Gene Wilder in The Producers. A brilliant, absolute brilliant portrayal. Bialystock blue. And there were so many great lines in that movie. Any Mel Brooks movie, you're going to come away with a bunch of lines. Of course, it was Dick Shawn. There's another guy. Nobody remembers Dick Shawn. I know, it was another generation. Dick Shawn was kind of the old school of edgy Jewish comics who were always on the verge of being really offensive, but he always pulled back a little bit. So instead what you have is just a guy who is really incredibly funny. He came from the same school of comedy, guys like Lenny Bruce and Mort Saw, and Lord Buckley, and people from that particular name. You probably don't know any of the names I'm talking about, but you should look into it. You should check those guys out, and certainly check out Dick Shawn. He was the hippie, right? He was Lorenzo, baby. Lorenzo C. Dubois. But my friends call me LSD. And what have you been doing, LSD? 5 to 20, but I'm clean, man. Right. And the whole Love Power song. But Gene Wilder, just an amazing. The other performance I wanted to mention, there was The Producers. Springtime for Hitler, of course. Springtime for Hitler and Germany. And the other Gene Wilder movie I love that nobody ever talks about, and it was a great little movie, a Western called The Frisco Kid. In the movie, he was a rabbi from Eastern Europe who was traveling to San Francisco, where he was going to take over. He was given, I don't know how they do it in the faith. Basically, he was going to take over this temple, the synagogue, and become the leading, what you would call the pastor in the Christian church of this synagogue in San Francisco. And it was all arranged. All he had to do was to get from Poland to San Francisco, and he had the job. It was his. And basically, the whole movie is about his adventures or wacky misadventures as he travels across the Old West. He has one friend, Harrison Ford, who was a cowboy. Actually, Harrison Ford was kind of started out as an outlaw in the movie. And then they got together, and things kind of changed. But it was all about how he was trying to get to San Francisco, dealing with all the bad guys on the way and everything else, to get to San Francisco so he could take over and become the rabbi for this particular Jewish congregation. But a great performance. The Frisco Kid, not the Cisco Kid. That was a different ethnicity altogether. No, the Frisco Kid. Frisco Kid was a friend of mine. Different thing entirely. But those two, the original Producers and the Frisco Kid. Your assignment for the next couple of weeks is to go rent both those movies and check them out, and you will thank me for doing so. All right. Now, a comment about the passing of Gene Wilder. Something I've heard a lot and I've seen a lot on social media, which for me mostly is Facebook, a little bit of Twitter. And I'm seeing a lot of people saying things about Gene Wilder like, well, he's back with Gilda now, because he was married to Gilda Radner. You know, nobody in the world wants to believe in the concept of reunion in the afterlife with your loved ones more than me. Nobody wants to believe in that kind of thing more than I do, and I don't, because I'm just not a religious person. But here's the point. After Gilda Radner died, Gene Wilder remarried. It was a few years after Gilda passed on, but he did remarry, and he and his wife, when he died, they had been married about 25 years. She was at his bedside when he died. So how exactly does that work, I wonder? You get to the pearly gates, and your love is there waiting for you, but then my wife is right behind me. She'll be here in about 12 years. How do you work? How does that work? I don't know. Somebody told me an acquaintance of mine who is a very devoutly religious person says, well, nobody's married in heaven. And I'm thinking, okay, does that mean everybody's married in hell? Ba-da-boom. Thank you. Good night. Okay. You're getting silly now. So I don't know. I'm just saying. It creeps me out a little bit. This kind of thing always has a potential to getting really creepy. It's like the old Ethel Kennedy thing. Remember Ethel Kennedy? Saying things like, well, I'm not going to remarry because I know Bobby's waiting for me. And your first inclination is to laugh at it, but then you go, that's just sad. But anyway, all of that aside, remembering the legacy, and it's a great one, of Gene Wilder. Your comments, welcomed and appreciated. SuperTalk1270.com. I'm Jim Walsh. Brandmeier coming up. Thanks again.
SuperTalk 1270 KLXX Mandan, Bismarck. Listen anytime, anywhere, online at SuperTalk1270.com.